Regular physical activity is one of, if not, the healthiest things you could possibly do. So why is it so difficult for the majority of people to stay consistently active over the long term? And it's not just beginners that struggle with this. Even those with a bit of experience in the gym or whatever activity they're involved in will eventually run into issues with staying consistent, pushing themselves, and they may just lose interest in what they were doing altogether. We might point to things like discipline and motivation and say that people who aren't very active just lack these attributes. But I think the issue is much deeper than that. How do I know this? Because that's where I was with my training about 5 years ago. I'd been active my whole life since I was a kid, but when I got into my mid-20s, something changed. I was bored of my training, I got injuries that just sent me on a downward spiral, I lost interest, not just in my training, but just life in general. I slowly found myself in a place I didn't recognize. I was being lazy with almost everything in my life. Lazy with my body, lazy in my work, lazy in my relationships. I was stressed, anxious, and unfulfilled for the first time in my life. Before this point in time, I had always been so energetic, full of life, and I had a deep sense of wonder of the world. How did I find myself where I was? What decisions led me to this point? I got into my line of work because when I was younger, I felt like physical activity was one of the best factors to living a happy and healthy life. But I was being a hypocrite. I knew something had to change. Not just in my life, but in how physical activity as a whole is viewed in our society. Something is obviously broken when the majority of people aren't able to meet physical activity guidelines, considering it's the best thing you can do for your health. Not only that, but I wanted to see past the collective misconception that physical activity is just something we have to do rather than something we need to view as part of our development as a whole. With this as my focus and countless hours of experimenting later, I think I've cracked the code. The thing is, in order to adopt this new viewpoint and to get the most from it, it requires a bit of a shift in how we view physical activity in the first place. Let's dive into it, shall we? If you didn't know, physical activity is the best thing you can do for your health. Have you ever heard something before that just stuck in your head and you can't get rid of? This happened to me in one of my lectures when I was in college studying sports science and health. One of the modules we had during the course was on epidemiology. This is the study of disease, how it occurs in different populations, and why. Naturally, we were being lectured on all of the different factors that affect disease, like lifestyle factors, genetic factors, environmental factors, and so on. When we were looking at things that are good for your health and reduce your risk of disease, we were told that exercise is the best contributing factor to a healthy lifestyle. It was summed up in a simple metaphor. If you could take all the health benefits of exercise and put them in a pill, you'd be the richest person in the world. It's the kind of statement that hits hard at the time, but even in the years since college, I've found myself coming back to it and really understanding its weight and impact. Let's just look very quickly at some of the benefits of physical activity in easy to understand terms so this metaphor makes more sense. Simply put, exercise can increase endurance and fitness, increase strength and muscle mass, improve your mobility and flexibility, prolong aging, lower your risk of injury, improve your mood, improve your confidence and body image, improve your immune system, increase brain function, reduce stress, etc., etc. I could go on and on with this, but I think you get the picture. So if somehow you weren't convinced already that exercise is one of the best things you can do for your health, hopefully now you are. But even with the knowledge that physical activity is good for us, why do so many people struggle to stay consistently active and meet recommended guidelines? I think the problem stems from how we view physical activity and the body as a whole within our society. I've had many conversations over the years with all kinds of people. People who have never really been active at all and have always struggled with physical activity. People that have been in and out of various things and never quite got the ball rolling with them. People who have dedicated a good bit of time and made it a good part of their routine, and even those on the extreme end that have made it a central part of their identity. Now, depending on where you are in this spectrum, that last one might seem a bit extreme, but there is a way we can achieve this level of awareness around physical activity that is harmonious with all aspects of our life. It's the whole point of this video. Conversations with people at these different stages are always very interesting. I've picked up on certain things over the years, and the people I'm talking to may not even be aware how they're framing physical activity by how they're talking about it. People that struggle with physical activity will often refer to it as a punishment. They may not say it as outright as I have just there, but they'll often talk about how they need to be dead by the end of a session, or they need to work off all the bad food they've been eating. They say it in very subtle ways, but when I start to probe further, it all seems to stem from the idea of seeing physical activity as boring, a chore, or something they have to do. When you've been inactive and you start a training routine of some form, it can be pretty tough for the first little while. But the way in which people with little experience approach physical activity often shows their true desires. They're more often than not after a short-term result and they want a rapid change. When results don't come within the first few weeks, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze and they abandon the goal. The expectation is so high that anything but ridiculous progress is seen as a failure. In these circumstances, the person has considered physical activity as just a means to an end. There was probably no real desire to continue with physical activity even if they reached their goal. Or at least that's how it looks on the outside based on their actions and how they talk about it. Conversations with those that have a better relationship with physical activity are very different. They'll be talking about things in a very similar way, but with a slight difference. It's more about the challenge that training presents, but working to overcome it. The way it's changing aspects of who they are, how they've learned to enjoy the feelings and sensations, and have gradually built a sense of awe and wonder about their own body and what they're capable of doing. It becomes an enriching part of life rather than something that drains you. Of course, they may have started with a very similar outlook on physical activity as those that crash and burn within a short period of time. But a little breathing room in terms of their expectations goes a long way. It allows them space to observe all the amazing knock-on effects their increased level of physical activity is starting to have on other areas of their life. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a much better outlook on physical activity, who we are as an individual, and life in general, doesn't it? So, how do we get there? I want to take apart physical activity, clarify its proper place in our life, and then put it back together with this big picture perspective. Let's peel back the layers of what we're actually looking at here. I want to present a new way of looking at physical activity that I believe is quite literally life-changing. Now I get it, it sounds like a big promise, but when you've worked with people that have gone through these amazing transformations, you start to understand how big of an impact physical activity can have on someone's life. So let's unpack it. If we look at the root of any decision to be more physically active, it stems from a desire for self-improvement or self-development. Now I know there's a cheesiness that comes to mind when we think about self-development, but I'd encourage you to question that belief. There's often a very strange internal battle that goes on in our head between our desire for self-improvement and our ego. Your ego is a very essential part of being human. It gives us a lot of agency in the world. You may hear it framed as a negative thing all the time, but it has benefits, of course. But one of the things to be aware of with the ego is that it will ruthlessly attempt to protect our current view of the world and our place in it. We may come to recognize at a certain point that our view of who we are and our current reality just isn't matching up. We feel sluggish, tired, bored, unfulfilled, lazy, all the negative things. We feel like something needs to change, right? Not according to our ego. We struggle with the ego when it comes to anything framed as self-development because the ego's job is to protect your self-image. The defense of the self-image is so sophisticated that the ego tries to cut the legs from under the idea of self-development. You'll start telling yourself that it's cringe or that other people trying to do better by themselves are laughable. I feel like this happens all the time, and it reminds me of a great clip of the rapper A$AP Rocky talking about criticism. He said, and I'm quoting here, "How are you gonna knock somebody in the world for actually trying to do something?" Trying. Since when has it become not cool to try? In my eyes, the attempt to belittle someone else for trying to develop comes from a place of insecurity. This way of viewing effort and a desire to do better as a negative thing is something we really have to be on the lookout for in ourselves. If we're able to see past this somewhat childish view, now we're able to look at self-development in a more honest and open way. Everything that requires conscious effort and sacrifice can be somewhat seen as a desire for self-development. There's an element of survival at play in a lot of things. We need to sleep, eat, and work a job, often just so we can function and live within society. There's almost a bare minimum standard to those things. We've all gone through periods of laziness and lack of fulfillment in life where we just about get out of bed in the morning, we barely feed ourselves, or we indulge in food we know isn't good for us, we hate our work and everyone around us, and we do just enough to keep our job. When we work away from this state in any way, we're looking to self-improve or self-develop. So it's a somewhat natural desire to want to improve your situation and who you are as a byproduct of that. Let's probe a little deeper and define self-development. I want you to imagine that there is a version of you in the future that is healthy, calm, centered, and content with everything around them in life. It's the ideal self we all think of if we are to realize our true potential in life. It can be hard to really ground this idea of an ideal self in the future. After all, it's just a made-up image in our own head. To give it more weight, I like to consider this possibility through the lens of the many worlds interpretation, or what's more commonly referred to as the multiverse. The idea is that parallel universes all exist at the same time. It's based on something called the superposition of an atom within quantum physics. Now, just bear with me for a moment while I explain this. Atoms are considered the building blocks of matter. Everything in our reality is made of atoms. When an atom is observed, you can see its position or where it is in space and time. But when we don't observe them, you can't know for definite where its position is in time and space. If you've heard of Schrodinger's cat, you know what this is. It's a famous thought experiment that the theoretical physicist Erwin Schrödinger used to explain the superposition of an atom. The idea is that a hypothetical cat, not a real one, is put into a box with a vial of poison that may or may not be released depending on certain conditions within the box. Because the box is closed and we can't see what's going on, the cat is considered to be simultaneously both alive and dead, considering its fate is linked to a somewhat random event that may or may not occur, which is the poison being released. So, how does this relate to parallel universes? Because Schrodinger's cat is considered both dead and alive at the same time, these two possibilities are considered branch points in the multiverse. Both possibilities are equally real and do not interact with each other, otherwise known as parallel universes. Alright then, so what does this have to do with our ideal self? In one of my previous videos, I talked about the importance of setting goals, and one of the exercises is to create two vivid versions of the future. I'm going to link that video somewhere on screen, or check the description of the video when you're finished. In that video, we had a vision, which is an ideal and meaningful life you want to work towards and aspire to. We also had an anti-vision, which is a worst case scenario if you were to let your bad habits and negative qualities take over your life. Well, when we look to the future, you could argue that each of these realities are equally real in the same way Schrodinger's cat is both dead and alive at the same time. So we just need to figure out how to bridge the gap between our current reality and our vision or our ideal self. So, bridging the gap. Think of your ideal self as way off in the future. It may seem like a lot of time has to pass in order to bring that person into reality. If you condense that time into space, I want you to think of it as on the opposite side of the room to you right now. You can literally see him or her within just a handful of steps. So what are the steps of the bridge that we need to build to get there? We first have to take stock of where we are right now. We are that person in the future. It's within us. As in, something has to come out of you in order to step into those shoes. One way of thinking about where we are right now is to think of ourselves as scattered. What I mean by this is we contradict ourselves in our actions. We may perform one action that's positive and acts as a step in the right direction, but then we perform another action that's negative and it's like we're taking two steps in the wrong direction. We have a good training session, but then we eat like crap and stay up late. When we look at the ideal self, we can think of them as being more unified, centered, or whole. What I mean by this is the future version of you is less scattered in their actions and more conscious of what they are doing and why. If we can identify the many elements and factors that we're made of, we can have everything within us working together and ultimately bringing harmony to the system. Less fragmented and scattered, more whole and centered. Let's first take a look at a very important factor in all of this. You might be asking, why the hell are we fragmented and scattered in our actions? Why aren't we able to just align all our actions with a goal and do exactly what we need to do? Why does it feel like an uphill battle to do very basic things as a human? One of the reasons why is something called entropy. Entropy is the general trend of matter to go from a state of order to disorder. Over time, everything in the universe will decay, lose energy, lose order, and become a mess. It's a concept that can be used to describe how any system will tend towards disorder, unless energy is put into the system in terms of maintenance or keeping order. Think of your closet. You have specific spaces for specific items of clothing like pants, t-shirts, jumpers, and so on. You either maintain the order within the system every time you put something in there, or you don't maintain the order. We've all looked at our closet before and recognized the mess because we just threw some stuff in there while we were in a rush one day. This is the natural tendency of things to lose order and become a mess over time. This can be applied to us as humans across time, considering we live in the world of matter. If you stop brushing your teeth, you're going to lose them sooner rather than later. If you stop washing your hair, it's going to get filthy sooner rather than later. If you stop being physically active, you're going to be weak and fatigued sooner rather than later. We have to recognize that effort needs to be put in or else things will fall apart. Think back to how I described the bare minimum self. Just about getting out of bed in the morning, barely feeding ourselves and doing the absolute minimum to survive. Entropy brings us towards this state as a human. Scattered, fragmented, chaotic, lacking order. If natural laws within the universe are bringing us towards this chaotic state, then we need to find a way to work against it. Luckily, we've developed a natural desire to self-develop. It may require effort, but we can reverse entropy. We can bring order to the system if we put energy in. Interestingly, we can take this one step further. With the right level of awareness, we can work towards becoming more unified, ordered, and whole. Let's take a look at what that means next. We're going to look at humans and who we are from a more robust vantage point. This framework is going to help us see physical activity from a whole new perspective in what it means to be human. The Greeks thought of man, or humans, as operating on 3 levels of reality. These are the 3 layers of self we're going to consider. Now, as I describe these 3 layers of self, I'm going to have this image next to me to just give you a reference point of what I'm talking about. The Greeks referred to nous as the plane of abstractions, ideas, and theory. It's sometimes thought of as intellect or intelligence, or the faculty of the human mind to distinguish truth, the principles of the world we live in that exist behind everything. Think of this plane as things we cannot touch but are nonetheless real. You cannot touch an idea, but bring an idea into reality and you can change the world. You might be more comfortable with thinking about nous as the mind in general. We associate rational thinking, logic, and reason to nous. A distinguishing feature here is that these ideas exist on their own plane of reality and they have no physical existence. As I said, you cannot touch an idea, but we still have the ability to think on this plane. As you can imagine though, there is a concretization that has to happen for an idea to come into existence. This concretization happens on the plane of matter, or what the Greeks referred to as soma. More specifically, when looking at this plane of existence as a layer of self, it refers to the body. A crude way of putting it is our meat wagon. We exist within a vessel that helps us navigate the world of matter. Interestingly, the world of matter is in a constant state of flux or change. The underlying natural law of entropy is at play here in the world of matter. Everything around us is changing. The vessel we are in is therefore in an ever-changing state as well. We may view it as a limited structure, but I believe this viewpoint leads us to greatly underestimate its potential in helping us navigate life. We'll look at this in more detail in a moment. The third layer of self, where all the magic happens, is the space between nous and soma. This space between is what the Greeks called psyche. While we might associate the word psyche with psychology and the mind, the Greeks thought of psyche as the soul. Another great translation of psyche is the invisible animating entity that occupies the physical body. You can almost think of psyche as the necessary life force that turns the meat wagon into something more alive. Reason, logic, and rationale are the dominant forms of thinking within nous, but psyche is more associated with emotions, images, symbols, and dreams, or aspects of what we may refer to as the unconscious. In my eyes, psyche or soul also relates to that which is present in all of us. Through this lens, we start to see the world as more interconnected and less about us as a sole individual. Now, let me remind you why I introduced these 3 layers of self. These layers of self give us a framework to help us understand what exactly self is and what exactly we're trying to harmonize or unify. All 3 layers exist equally. It's as if we need to become more conscious of all 3 layers simultaneously to really navigate reality to its fullest. You can see this in the graphic representation where consciousness runs through all the layers. A more poetic and symbolic representation of this is seen in the symbolism of a charioteer controlling horses. This is more common in Eastern traditions with their own frameworks, which we won't dive into in this video for time's sake, but the idea still holds true in that the horses, or layers of self, are all pulling in their own direction. You can think of this as being scattered or fragmented. The charioteer represents the awakened part of us that struggles and strains to unify these separate parts into a more coherent whole. If we're to succeed in this endeavor, we must recognize these different parts in ourselves. A major criticism of Western philosophy and tradition is that we've identified too heavily with rationale, logic, and science. You can think of this as nous or the mind. Of course, it's given us many incredible things that have advanced civilization and helped us progress as a species. Think of the impact modern medicine and technology have had in advancing our life expectancy. But there has been a cost to pay for all this advancement. We all seem to be out of sync with the other layers of self. We've all slowly morphed into a being that lives too much in its own head and not enough in the body. The big thing I want to highlight with this framework is the balance between all elements and how that affects our experience. By tipping the scales towards nous or the mind, we've almost forgot that we have a body in the first place and how vital it is to being human. We have to act on the physical plane. It's a fundamental part of the human experience. When we do not act in practical ways, we suffer. Even the famous psychotherapist Carl Jung would talk about the importance of life over analysis. He didn't want analysis to become the main focus. Analysis was supposed to be used as a tool to help you act in the world. So even with something so heavily linked to nous and psyche, there is still an undeniable connection to soma and the need to practically take action with the body. With all this being said, I believe we have to tip the scales in the other direction. We have to rebuild our awareness of the body, what it means to practically apply knowledge, and what it means to be a human. When we have skin in the game with all three layers, then we're much more well-rounded and integrated as an individual. So, how do we self-develop? Let's zoom back out for a moment and re-establish the landscape. We first looked at the root of our desire to be physically active in the first place, and that was to self-develop. This is the why behind physical activity. Once we can accept this, it opens the door to all other forms of self-development. We then imagine self-development as trying to bridge the gap between where we are right now and the ideal self that's standing on the opposite side of the room. To understand what exactly the self part of self-development is, we introduced nous, psyche, and soma. In my eyes, this framework allows us to see the vital role the body, or just physical existence, plays in who we are as a human. What we can start to see is that we don't really have anything that satisfies us on all three levels. This, I believe, is the space where physical activity can plug into if we're open to redefining it. You see, more Eastern forms of physical activity are much more aware of this connection, but most modern forms are disconnected from this. There is only a trickling impact on our mental or spiritual development because of its limited scope. But with a widened lens of viewing physical activity and more of an emphasis on including practices that also help us develop on a mental and spiritual level, we can see how we're working on one layer of self, and then there's going to be an ascending up into other layers. Not only is there an impact ascending up the layers of psyche and nous, but there's also going to be an impact descending down as we make a deeper connection to those layers of self and start to ground them a little more. If we're to adopt this wider perspective, we can now look at practical ways of improving the self via any or all of these layers simultaneously. So, how do we go about doing this? I've said it a few times already. The big thing we want to focus on is what we can practically do. Philosophy and theory can only get us so far. We have to do something on the physical or soma plane of existence. So what will that look like? Now things are starting to become grounded in what we can actually do in our practice. If we want to impact our development, we do so in three practical ways. Let's look at them in terms of our current reality. Who we are right now is made of our skills, habits, and beliefs. Think of your skills as the things that you can do right now. Most of us feel as if we need to upskill in some way if we're going to make forward progress in life. You'd be right in thinking that. There's a certain amount of luck, chance, and hazard that goes along with it, of course, but right now we're concerned with the things that are in our control. We have to consider what are the skills I need in order to bridge the gap to my ideal self. This can be in relation to your work or even the type of person you want to be. This is the easiest thing for us to understand in terms of competency. If I don't possess the skills required to become what I see as my ideal self, however I've imagined them, then I can practically learn those skills. If you think about this in terms of physical activity, you have certain movements that you've learned and are currently able to do with your body. Another practical way of developing is to consider your habits or routines. In my eyes, your habits are such an integral part of who you are. It's only when you zoom out and observe your day and then your week do you start to see your current reality from a new perspective. You realize you repeat the same things day after day, and they either keep you stuck in certain areas or they become the stepping stones to a new state of being. I had a conversation with someone the other day who was saying how they used to have such a great morning routine and that they need to get back into it. They kept meaning to get up and do a short yoga routine in the morning to to wake up the body because they always feel better for having done so. I said, yeah, it's funny how we're all the same when it comes to changing our behaviors. We have our default states that our brain just automatically goes into. So every morning you're faced with the question, do I get up and do my morning routine? But you're probably rationalizing straight away that you don't need to do it. It doesn't take much convincing because your brain has more of an attraction towards your current habit of not doing the yoga routine. You're then telling yourself, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow, and then it gets pushed off once more. The task seems pretty simple, right? Get up half an hour before you usually do, go and do the yoga routine, and you'll feel better afterwards. But this is the battle we all face on a daily basis when it comes to our own behaviors we want to change. It may not be a yoga morning routine for you, but there's something you know you should start doing that you just keep pushing off and saying, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow. So if your current habits aren't bringing you towards your ideal self, then you can change this practically by adopting new habits. I discussed behavior change and habits in one of my recent videos, so I will link it on the page right now, but I'll also throw it in the description as well. So have a look at it if you want to learn more about that topic. Our beliefs are another practical area that's contributing to our current reality. We may not realize just how much we're limiting ourselves by how we're approaching certain things. You can see how this is an access point into nous and psyche a little bit, and we'll try to ground it in how it affects our actions. In the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, she presents two opposing mindsets that people can fall into. There's a growth mindset and then there's a fixed mindset. In simple terms, a growth mindset is where the individual believes that basic qualities can be improved, whereas a fixed mindset is where the individual believes that basic qualities are fixed or permanent and can't be improved. I love to think of the difference between these two mindsets in how someone would talk to themselves. We may not realize that with certain areas of life, we're very much in a growth mindset with them, whereas the other areas we're in a fixed mindset with them. I'll throw a graph up on screen where you can kind of see the difference here in terms of how someone will be talking to themselves. You can see on one side with a growth mindset where someone is saying things like, failure is an opportunity to grow. I can learn to do anything I want. Challenges help me to grow. My effort and attitude determine my abilities. Feedback is constructive. I'm inspired by the success of others. I like to try new things. You can see the opposite side of this with a fixed mindset where someone might say things like, failure is the limit of my abilities. I'm either good at it or I'm not. My abilities are unchanging. I don't like to be challenged. I can either do it or I can't. My potential is predetermined. When I'm frustrated, I give up. Feedback and criticism are personal. I stick to what I know. This shows up in practice with my students all the time. They may not realize how they're limiting themselves by the way they're talking to themselves when they attempt to do something challenging. They may get frustrated when attempting a new movement and say something along the lines of, I don't think I'm strong enough to do it. I try my best in this situation to make them aware of the fact that by saying I'm not strong enough, they're now going to approach the situation with that mindset framing their actions. If they go into the next rep with that frame of mind, then they're right. They won't be strong enough because they've limited themselves. It's now become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas if they were to approach the situation with the mindset of, I can do this, I just haven't figured it out yet, then now they have the room to not only fail, but to use that failure as a way of gathering data and ultimately using it to figure out the puzzle in front of them. Everything can now be used as fuel towards the positive outcome rather than the negative outcome. I'm hoping that by looking at these three areas of skills, habits, and beliefs, you're able to see how we can actually impact our development in a practical way. What are the skills I need to develop? What are the habits I need to adopt? What are the beliefs I need to change? These practically grounded actions help us form more of a roadmap and plan when it comes to building the steps of the bridge towards the ideal self. Instead of the road being murky, it now becomes way more clear because they're now steps in a process. By looking theoretically at nous, psyche, and soma, we know what we're trying to change. By looking practically at our skills, habits, and beliefs, we know how we're going to change. With all of this laid out, I want to give you more of a definite roadmap and plan in my next video. I'm going to show you behind the curtains of my work with my students and show what the curriculum looks like and how it helps us develop on all three levels. This video was more about the theory behind my work, so I promise on the next one it will be way more specific about the practices we do and the ways in which we'll build them into our routine. If you've liked my line of thought in this video, then I think you'll be really interested to see how this all comes together. The main way I want you to think of this is physical activity is still the main focus. I like to think of it as using physical activity as a platform for self-development. I'm excited to share everything with you in the next one. For now, make sure you like the video, you subscribe to the channel, you follow me on social media, all that sort of stuff. I've linked to a few things in the description of this video as well. And by the time I've got the video ready, it's probably on screen now, ready for you to have a look at as well. See you on the next one, folks.